Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to World Product Day 2020 in New Zealand. My name is Ramanan Murthy, and I'll be your MC for the next 1 hour. So for those who are not familiar with World Product Day, this is the day to celebrate and appreciate the craft of product management. Mind the Product and Product Hang around the world has been celebrating World Product Day for the last 3 years. And what happens in this World Product Day is that there is a series of marathon of events starting from New Zealand to all the way to West Coast US. So this time, we're going to have nearly 50 events in 40 different countries in the next 25 hours. So happy World Product Day. And let me start with a message from the MTP crew around the world. So David will now play the video for you.
Happy World Product Day!
Good. This is so entertaining.
Back to you, Ramona.
Cool. So all this wouldn't have been possible without the Mind the Product. So they've done so much for the product community and created this global community of product people. You may be familiar about their conferences and possibly familiar about the meetup group, the Product Hang arm. Now, at the end of this talk, talks from Wellington will cover a couple of offerings that MTP has been offering recently, and then how we can benefit from New Zealand. Also want to make a big shout out to Optimizely, who has been sponsoring World Product Day, sponsoring the MTP and the Product Hang as well. You can check out more about them on their website. Also like to ask you to make some noise on the social media using these hashtags. And let me go down to the speaker and the topic. So John Cutler is still flying, but he's joining from San Francisco remotely today to talk about his reflection on his original post about Feature Factory 3 years ago. So we have posted this original post on the Medium in the Meetup group. So you probably have seen that and read the article. Now John is going to talk about this a little bit. So those who don't know about John, so John is a product evangelist at Amplitude. Hi, John. And he has been a contemporary product management thought leader. And he's so popular that there's around 35,000 Twitter followers for him and nearly 25,000 followers on the Medium as well. In fact, in my workplace, we have a Slack group dedicated for John, and we call that Cuttlefish Appreciation Society. So that's how popular you are, John.
No way.
And
That's yes. Crazy.
And I think we should also recognize that John has made a particularly big effort to look like himself. We had a test call, and we asked for his ID because the way his hair was looking after 8 weeks of COVID lockdown made him look like a different person. So I really appreciate, John, you making the effort to tidy up a bit, and you look great now.
This is a big, anyone with a 2-year-old with 2 parents working at home will know what the last 8 weeks have devolved into. So
yeah. So just
I cleaned up a little bit.
Couple of things before I hand it over to John. If you'd like to ask any questions, please do use the Zoom Q&A feature. Do not use the chat function because it'll be easier for us to mark those questions as answered. And also, if you didn't know, if you want to see John in the big screen, not the presentation, you can click or double click on the Zoom video as well. One thing I forgot to mention earlier on, this World Product Day is very special for us because the New Zealand cities have broken the regional boundaries and come together as one team. So we have Product Hang Auckland, Product Hang Wellington, and Product Management and Product Marketing Group from Christchurch joining here as well. So we had over 500 registration for this. So I think it's safe to say this is probably one of the biggest product management event New Zealand have seen virtually. So on that note, I hand it over to you, John.
Sure. Let's get the tech to work. All right.
I'm going to turn my video off and leave you to it, John. So hopefully you'll be.
Yeah, you will need to stop sharing, Ramanan, and then I will be able to share.
Okay, I'm doing that now.
There, perfect. Okay, let's see what we can do here. Transitions. Can we see a screen? Do we have a screen?
Yeah, looks good.
We can.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Ramanan, and thank you to Product Hang Auckland for inviting me. Yeah, times are pretty tough, and so I hope everyone is healthy and safe It's definitely been a challenge, but it's exciting to celebrate this day and think about our craft and what we're doing. And I'm very grateful to the Mind the Product crew. I don't know if you have followed, they've had to sort of dramatically rethink how they think about their events, and they've added, you know, a community and a subscription community and those things. And it shows their willingness to adapt to what they're doing to serve the community. And while that might seem difficult at first and change, it really shows their passion for the community. So I think it's worth thanking them. So for the talk today will be a sort of retrospective on some things I've learned since writing a particular post a couple years ago. That post was called 12 Signs You're Working in a Feature Factory. Let me briefly introduce myself. It's the Medium follower counts and stuff like that are more accidental, about writing a lot over a couple years. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. I currently work full-time at a company called Amplitude. Amplitude makes you know, product analytics, product intelligence software, products for other teams. Our goal is to, you know, happy product teams. And my role there is I'm actually a coach, and I do workshop design, and I work on content. And I do some internal coaching, but most of the coaching is actually external for customers and prospects and the broader product public. I've had the pleasure of working with some teams from New Zealand, and that's been rewarding for me. But if you need to reach me in any way, here's some good ways at the moment. Twitter, being a parent, Twitter is just about my attention span at the moment. So you could reach me there. I recently tried to move my stuff off of Medium for various reasons. But I moved it all to a site called Cuttle.fish. So you could check out, there's about 500 posts there. And in 2020, I'm writing a post a week on Substack to try to experiment with some other things. And that gets delivered to your inbox. And if for some reason the audio craps out or whatever, someone just reach out, and I'll just keep plodding ahead and won't keep checking in to see if it's working, because that could happen. Great. So about 3 years ago, or it's a bit more now, in 2016, I wrote a blog post called 12 Signs You're Working in a Feature Factory. And I want to give you a bit of the backstory because it's kind of funny in a sense. I was doing a user research study for Medium. And one thing that annoyed me on Medium was that the minute that you seem to add a number to the title of a blog post, you know, 5 signs, whatever, or 5 ways, it seemed to get, you know, astronomically more traffic than the posts that I poured my heart and soul into. It was almost like a formula. The more heart and soul you put into a post, the fewer the people would actually read it. Now I'm familiar a little bit more with marketing, so I see that that's probably just how it works. But at the time, it seemed to be very unfair to me. And so I was doing a user research for Medium that involved using like video diary study. And I said, look, I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to write this post about something that I think gets people excited, and then we'll watch to see how it does. And that post turned out to be this 12 Signs You're Working in a Feature Factory. And now in retrospect, you know, looking at these particular items, it's one of those posts that, you know, who can't point to one of these things and say, oh, that's my company, you know, or I've had that problem. So it listed things like no measurement, teams getting shuffled around, what I would call success theater, you know, celebrating things that didn't really sort of warrant celebrating. Infrequently acknowledging failure, I guess, you know, cousin to success theater, no metrics, no retros. So you get the idea. All these things, I think, you know, at least in my career as someone working on the front lines in product, I felt at one point or another. And I'd been using this idea of this feature factory idea to explain what I meant. And so hopefully this provides some reference for the rest of the talk. But I wrote it a while ago, and the original intent was not to even provide a solution. It really was one of those posts that it's just meant to rile people up and actually demonstrate to Medium that posts with numbers in them get more traffic. So it has gotten a lot more traffic over the years and continues to do so. I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now if I hadn't written this silly post, because it meant that I could continue doing what I like, which is this writing and teaching. I wouldn't be working at Amplitude if I hadn't written this post. So things work in mysterious ways. Now, one thing that I learned when I wrote this, and now is sort of played out in hundreds of conversations since writing this post, is that at the core, people care deeply about having impact in their work and their work having meaning. And even when people have come to me very, angst-ridden about the Feature Factory post, and even when people have, sent it internally in their Slack channel, when I trace back what this is really about, it's that people care about their work having an impact. And another thing that you notice, or I've noticed since then too, is that it's actually possible to fake that for a little bit. An engineer can get really into the tech stack that they're working with. A designer could get really into everything being pixel perfect. A product manager can get into, certain elements of what they're doing. And so for some period of time, you can talk yourself out of it. But at the end of the day, people care about their work having impact. And I think that all that angst and anxiety from the way I wrote that post really boils down to a positive thing, that we want to have impact in our work and that we care on a very deep level. Now, I've learned a lot since then, and I've really dedicated my work in some ways or another to talking about things that I've learned since writing that, but I've never really packaged it up in one talk. And that's what I want to do today, is I want to go through some things that have really resonated with me, and where I've actually had to challenge myself and challenge my own biases that I had a couple of years ago in thinking about this particular problem, because it would be easy for me to just kind of ride that out and just have that be my thing, but I'm not 100% in alignment with those things that I mentioned there. And there's a whole other layer of a story here that I think is worth telling. And so the rest of the talk, I'm going to break up into 6 different key lessons. This is the first lesson, but I will then do a recap and we'll do a Q&A at the end. But these are 6 themes or things that have come up again and again and again in my discussions about the Feature Factory and me talking to teams. Now I talk to 20 or 30 teams a week, especially now virtually, it's possible to talk to anyone. So these things get repeated all the time. So I'm going to jump into the 6 points. This is the first one, poor slide selection on my part, but if you have any questions, if you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar feature, there's a Q&A functionality, and I will go through those questions, answer as many as possible. And ones that we don't get to, I will give you my email at the end. We could start a conversation over email if that's better. So the first major lesson upon writing this Feature Factory post and talking to teams is just how counterintuitive new ways of working can be in product. Now, if you've done product your whole life, and I don't know, I think I've been at this maybe for 20 plus years in one way or another through startups and my own projects and then bigger companies, you internalize a lot of truisms, you internalize a lot of realizations in your work. And even junior people do this as well. Once you've done it a little bit, you sort of realize things. But to the rest of the world, to the rest of the people in your company, working in these ways can be highly counterintuitive. And you look at that Feature Factory post and it sort of reads like an angry person in your company saying, oh, you don't understand the success theater, things like that. But in reality, a lot of these ways of working are counterintuitive. And the upshot is that real change happens not through telling or rationalizing or sending out the Feature Factory post. Real change happens when people are shown what better looks like and they can see the benefits for themselves. This is especially interesting in startups or companies where an early team was phenomenally successful by being very output focused. And this happens all the time in startups. When you have a startup, and at least initially, you're very focused on a particular persona. They're telling you everything that they want and they need, and you have a list a mile long. And oh, those are the glory years, and you're shipping like fiends, and customers are happy and patting you on the back. And those early, this happens in bigger companies too, when you have the first kernel of a product that goes out there as well. Or you have team members who've only shipped new products, right? Who have only experienced that. And so what you find is that it's this sort of hardship for the founders there, especially in these companies, where at a certain point they have to transition away from that type of thinking, but it can be extremely difficult and counterintuitive for them to do that, because literally what got them there was being more output centric, being, exhibiting some of these signs of what I explained in the Feature Factory post. And they hit this point where they're at the top of the podium and everything's been successful, and they're sort of surrounded by all these people talking about outcomes. And it's very common at that point for the CEO to say, forget all this stuff you're talking about. What got us here was just shipping and listening to customers, and we just got to keep shipping features and everything's going to be okay. And part of the realization of the Feature Factory post was that is a very, very human place to be for a founder of a company or some part of the founding team. And you can't just go up to them and say, I read Josh Seiden, and we have to do outcomes over outputs, and that's just how the cool companies are working, and so you're wrong. It just will never cut it to talk like that in your company, right? So what happens, and I would regard this even in some banks and some other things, and another angle of this is what I would call the sort of functional feature factory, right? Where the company had nothing to begin with. They had no product function. They had no design interaction with developers. They had nothing. And what evolved was what I call a functional feature factory. This person on the left doesn't see any problem with this, right? It's a lot better than what they had before, when nothing ever worked. People didn't even know what a feature was. It was just a mess. And we're developing these sort of moderately usable features, and things are going out the door, and you have a well-organized prescriptive roadmap, when before you just had a list of projects. Now there's a product vision. Now this feels like a step up. And that has been a realization talking with teams as well, is that a lot of that feature factory language in that post doesn't take into account the journey that teams have made. And ironically, it's often the journey that becomes your Achilles heel. Some of the companies that are the hardest to budge in terms of thinking about letting go some of the feature factory things are the companies that are moderately successful with a sort of functioning feature factory, and things look actually pretty decent from that standpoint. So, this is a standard case of what got you here won't get you there, right? The same structures that enable the functional feature factory, the specs that are being worked out and design doing their mock-ups, and the prescriptive roadmaps that get everyone aligned on those particular things, are literally the same structures that make it difficult to bust out of the feature factory and get to that point. And so that was a key, aha moment for me, was this idea that for many companies, what's happening is not outwardly bad, and literally the things that are happening at the moment are what are making that next step difficult. And so it started to deepen my understanding of change management, and thinking about these companies, and thinking about transformation in those companies and progression. Now, if Josh Arnold or other people I know from New Zealand are on the call, they'll say, well, this idea you need to go step by step is flawed, and I would agree with them in some ways. There's no reason why you need to plod through all the steps of working in one way to get to a better way of working. But the reality is, for many companies, they're sort of caught in their own little swirl of success at a certain point. And I would end this particular section to think about, to just reiterate this idea that, and I'll give this with a story. There's a company here in Santa Barbara And a VP of engineering was sitting in a meeting and everyone was talking about some work taking 3 quarters to get done. And the VP of engineering said, I want to make revenue in 3 days. And everyone looked at them like they were from another planet. No one had ever said anything that heretical in that company. No one. The other engineering managers were looking like, you're crazy. Their UX researchers were thinking, you're crazy. The product managers were thinking you were crazy. And this person built the political capital, or whatever you want to call it, in their company to run the experiment they wanted to run. And they indeed were making money in 3 days. And they learned a lot about that effort that allowed them to shape a better path forward than had been established through the larger plans. So that's a perfect example where if you go to a normal executive and say, the things that you think are going to take 3 quarters, you can actually make money in 3 days, especially in banking or especially in other things, they will look at you like you have 6 eyes, right? That's crazy. Another great example is I did a recent poll on Twitter about, whether your executives had actually ever seen a usability test in action, and a tiny, very, very small percentage of those people said yes, they had. All new ways of working. Just one more example, because it happened in the last couple of days. A Northern European country, because of COVID, needed legal developers, designers on the phone together. And while they were writing the law, they were writing the software so that they could deploy something on a government level. Now, if you had said to a lawyer and a developer and anyone, even a year ago or 3 quarters ago or 2 quarters ago, would you ever see those people on a call and literally shipping before the law ink is fresh? Or we obviously don't probably use pens right now, but you get the idea. Everyone would have thought you were crazy. So it really does seem like magic at some points. So the real lesson here is show, don't tell. There's no way around that for what we're doing. Now, this one is a subtle thing, and it came up again and again with the Feature Factory post, is that I think a lot of people read it, especially engineers, I think, and other business people, and they thought, I see, you're right. We're running a terrible ship here, and if we could just measure everything, we'd be able to prove from now until eternity that we're doing the right thing. We'll settle all our ties. We can justify my strategy. We'll be able to rank teams. There is this sort of mythical top-down management if we could just figure this out, and every argument would be settled. And it's just simply not the case. And that's been a huge learning for me. It's not so much a learning for me because I sort of understand this differentiation myself, but learning how easily organizations shift into measuring to control. Oh, typo, conform. No, I did get it right. Zoom's in the way. So measuring to conform versus measuring to learn. This has been a big thing. So a great example here would be, a team looks at something like OKRs and says, we're going to beat the Feature Factory with OKRs, with this streamlined goal setting. And it just turns into management by objectives by another name, right? It's not solving the underlying problem of whether the team is learning and adapting and using new information to change what they're doing. And this distinction has been something I've had to reiterate over and over again, especially as people sort of fixate on elements of that Feature Factory post about success theater and not having metrics. They think the sort of the antidote to the solution to all that is to suddenly have proof for everything, and it just doesn't exist in the way that people think it's going to exist. In fact, to embrace measurement requires more safety, more psychological safety, more trust on your team, because you're going to be exposing about how many of the things you're doing don't actually work. And so you need more of that, not less of that, and that's very important. 2 great examples of this. I mentioned the OKR thing is really funny. Another one that's really funny that comes up is this, this hippo thing. People read the Feature Factory post and they said, well, we have to destroy hippo decision making once and for all. We're going to chop the hippos now. We're going to get all the data, and we're going to not make decisions based on gut anymore or qualitative data. We're going to get these people. And can you hear how low trust that is? that's not going to win you many friends to think about it, especially when you happen to be the highest paid person, and or you happen to be a person who wants the team to act on a hunch that you have and to take a chance on what you're saying. And so you see this sort of overflow into A/B testing, where, you know, they say, well, we've got to A/B test everything so we don't work in a feature factory, and that's simply not true. Those things, again, what this is about is it's about a trust proxy, and people looking for a trust proxy instead of thinking about what it means for their teams. So you have to set up some kind of cadence to create a learning review or a learning cycle for this to work through. And that's been a learning and a focus of my work since then. Now, another area that is we can chat about briefly, is that it's hard to work this way. I think people read the Feature Factory post and they say, well, if we could just solve all these problems, things would be easy. But as I just alluded to before about measurement and learning that your stuff isn't working, even under the best circumstances, even with psychological safety, even with support, even with low work in progress, even with stability, taking a more outcome-focused approach takes practice and it takes skill. Data literacy takes practice. Interacting with customers takes practice. Challenging our assumptions takes practice. Shaping the work, this idea of kind of whittling down the work to something that's actionable takes practice. And no team I've met suddenly figures this out on the first go. It's literally a loop you have to go through. Again, and we're not talking about sprints. The idea that you need to go through sprints to learn this stuff is kind of weird. What we're talking about is the full build, measure, learn loop, where you're learning about your decision quality and as it played out over time. And this is something that doesn't just magically appear. It's work that you have to do. And when I wrote that original Feature Factory post, like I knew this part of it, but I hadn't communicated it. And there was a certain vibe in that original post which made it seem like you could just fix things by just addressing this terrible feature factory. And now my work is almost solidly focused on creating these learning loops for teams, and creating the safety for them to work this way. And I'm not sure how many folks are, product leaders or very experienced. There's probably a lot of experienced people on this particular call, but we have a part in this too. And in some ways we have a part in keeping the feature factory in place. And this has been another retrospective item for me, is that by not standing side by side teams and getting into the thick of it and working and showing instead of telling, we're often leaving teams rudderless. And I think that a lot of leaders, I've noticed and observed in my coaching with Amplitude, that a lot of leaders think of this sort of, well, I need to sort of training wheels my team in, that I need to give them a little bit of a leash and then step back. And I think what they're confusing there is that they're forgetting that they have skills to share. They have teaching to do. And when the experienced people in the organization silo themselves away into some back room and do all this thinking and think about outcomes, and the teams are working on this very prescriptive stuff, the quote unquote training wheels, there's no way for them to learn. And that has been, often the feature factory posts resonated with people who are a bit more experienced and looking for this extra level of meaning in their work. And I keep catching them not teaching alongside their teams. And I think that that's an important component to this. So, the action item there is you need to do more side-by-side practice with your teams, more starting together with your teams. And I didn't call that out explicitly in the post, and that's been, if I was to revise it now, that would be a big part of it. Those of you who follow me on Twitter, know I have this obsession with work in progress, and this has been growing year after year. But I'd be lying if I said that I was obsessed with this 4 years ago or 3 years ago when I wrote this post. And it's important because I wasn't fully appreciating the impact of this on every single feature factory item that I listed there. And the post almost reads as if these were personal blame, the the delinquent product manager, the manager shuffling the teams. And when you really boil this back, I share this image a lot. I don't need to go into it in depth, but what this shows is that if work is taking forever, if you're lost in this loop of high work in progress, there's going to be no outcome-driven work. It's not going to happen. And if you look and follow this chart around, right, throughput goes down and time to learn goes up, and rework goes up and outcomes go down, and morale goes down, and opacity goes up, and distrust goes up, and outcomes goes down. There's pressure for short-term results. You need silver bullets. You hire middle managers to do human load balancing. You reward people who are busy. There's dependencies. There's more cooks. You get the idea. This is just a quagmire of problems. And if you go back to that Feature Factory post, I could go step by step. There's one thing about playing Tetris with teams and moving on to the next project. Check. This happens when work in progress goes up. There's something about not starting together and feeling like people are disconnected from the work. Check. If you're trying to play Tetris, there's no way that you're going to start together as a team. This idea of this, when I say Tetris, what I mean is this idea of packing in the efforts to keep everyone extremely busy. And this has many ramifications. This means that teams have small groups of people going upstream and sort of converging and pre-converging on items. It means you're too busy. It means you can't. There was a great quote recently. A team said, "We know something's working when we spend longer on it." It just blew my mind. It made sense, but what they were saying is that when it works, we actually spend longer on it because we continue to sort of double down on what we're learning. And when you're playing Tetris, none of that happens. You're never going to do that. So to summarize here, there's a cycle of terrible and bad things that have nothing to do with any particular person. I guess you could argue that maybe someone's not reducing WIP, but one of the things back in that particular drawing is you could be in the morale sapping part of that and think that it's your manager who's doing a bad job, but it really is a larger systemic thing to do. But I didn't, when I wrote that post, fully appreciate the impact that work in progress has. So what do you do to solve that problem? You have to visualize, right? You have to put the work up, and ideally on a program level where you haven't broken down these little stories into things. And I love visualizations like these. They become harder now. We're all working remote, but they're not entirely impossible. So moving on, another area that I've become very deeply involved in and thinking about is strategy. It's a big word, an abused word. And I am actually not going to profess to be, a product strategy crazy person. There's some people who sort of study every company and what their strategy was. And I do study some companies, but I don't spend all day writing or thinking about product strategy. The important part here is that I didn't have one thing in that Feature Factory post about strategy. And if you think about strategy manifests as a conversation about value and beliefs and forecasts of what things will happen and the sea changes that are happening in a particular market. They're not a plan. Product strategy is not a product vision. It's not a roadmap. None of that is product strategy. Product strategy is a mental model of beliefs and bets. And the key realization is that until you come up with a common vocabulary, if your product team has a language of outcomes as changes in user behavior, and the other part of your organization thinks about revenue, and another part of the organization thinks about qualified leads, and another part of your organization is thinking about retention, it doesn't matter whether you've beaten the Feature Factory because no one's going to care, because you haven't found a common vocabulary, something sort of rooted in the strategy that you have that everyone can relate to. And this is especially hard because products are like a layer cake, right? Like, it's good decisions made over time. The decisions the team made 3 years ago are the decisions that maybe that they're truly exploiting and capitalizing on right now. So if you can't have a vocabulary about strategy and impact and value and kind of connect these things, no amount of anxiety and angst about your feature factory is going to make a difference, because even if you solve it and you don't solve this sort of underpinning of the team, you're going to have a lot of trouble. There's one point, and I jump back to this, is that a lot of this is this idea of you'll see a company has a business strategy and a product strategy and a design strategy and a support strategy. And while it is important to have areas of focus for strategy, if there's not that common language that connects those particular things, it's very, very hard to talk about outcomes. It's very hard to talk about why you shouldn't work in the feature factory type way. So I've done most of my work, maybe the last year, is around stuff related to this, about teaching things like Northstar Framework. I wrote a book about that, that Amplitude has offered up. So the nice thing about working full-time at a company, you get to give away free books. I do a lot of belief mapping, assumption mapping, and sort of shared language building across organizations as a precursor to beating the feature factory. Like, this is a foundational thing that I try to get in motion so that you don't have these teams chipping away in isolation and never really kind of connecting their work to what they're doing. And so that brings me to the final point. And I think that this is sort of, to pull it all together here, is the so what. You know, people would read that feature factory post and say, yeah, this sucks. We don't want to work this way. And you'd say to them, well, why? Why don't you want to work this way? Well, it sucks. You know, who would want a success theater? You know, this is the problem about writing an angsty post like that. So there is a so what. You know, you want to work in a way that's going to encourage sustainable growth for your company that benefits your customers, benefits your community, benefits your employees. This is why we're doing all this. And if you lead with the how instead of if you lead with the way instead of the why, you'll run into trouble when you do this. So this is where, and I'll end because is my sixth one, because I think this is important, is a lot of teams who took this feature factory post to heart have done a lot of amazing work. They've become more outcome focused. They've been working, but they never solved that problem before, of that strategy connection problem. And so what happens is that they actually have never figured out how to communicate with the rest of the business or make their outcomes matter to anyone in the particular company. And that's a critical step to making this work. If you just solve on the product team, that actually does no one any good. If it doesn't resonate with your teammates, it doesn't resonate with sales, if it doesn't resonate with your CEO or other people, your effort completely fizzles out. This is especially important if you're asking everyone to take kind of like a long bet on something that will only materialize after a year or two or three, and you need everyone bought into that. If you're not talking their language, and if you're just throwing product theory at them, it's very unlikely that they're going to embrace what you're saying. And I've seen the pendulum swing back in a number of companies that they never cracked that nut. They were actually doing pretty well, but the pendulum swung back hard because you got a new CEO or know someone in place and said, so what? How has this helped us as a business? And no one ever made that sort of critical link. And so very, very quick story I tell a lot is that, you know, there's a salesperson, they said, you know, I used to sell on the roadmap you gave me, but now I will sell on the last 12 months of work that you've done because it's so innovative, right? And that's kind of what you're looking for. But unless you have those conversations and build that trust, you know, sales is just going to come up with their own product strategy if you're not speaking their language and what they need to do. So the key point here is you need to move beyond intellectualizing the feature factory or this outcome thing or how your team is supposed to work, or, you know, oh, I read that intercom works this way, so we need to work like that. Trust me, I've talked to a lot of those teams too, and it's never quite rosy. It's still hard everywhere. It's extremely difficult everywhere. So you really need to think about how to make to lead with the why and not the way, and have this stuff resonate. And that was another learning when I retrospect on the feature factory. So to summarize, to wrap up, the key action items and that I would say, hope to leave you with would be show, don't tell. So realize that this work it seems very heretical. The feature factory post will make sense to product developers or some of them, but will not make sense to anyone else. And you just need to accept that. And the second thing is that you need to set up some kind of learning review to try to shift the idea of measurement for conformity or control to measurement to learning. Because I work in an analytics company. The best teams are always refining how they measure. This idea that you somehow kick off your effort, you figure out how to measure success, you snap your fingers. Was it successful? Yes or no? That just never plays out in reality. This is a muscle that you need to build. Related to the building the muscle, this idea of more side-to-side practice, that you need to be there in the trenches working with the team and showing them, not asking them to ride training wheels, but showing them how to work this way. And if you do that, over months, we had a saying that it takes about 12 to 24 months to turn a junior person into a really sort of skilled, outcome-focused product developer at a company we worked at, and I think that that's true. You want to visualize the work and try to lower that work in progress. You want to think about how you work strategy into what you're talking about to build a common vocabulary. And then the final thing, again, is get beyond intellectualizing the feature factory or the outcome thing and really see if you can answer the so what for the people in your company. Is it helping you grow your business sustainably, product-led growth, or however you want to call it, instead of marketing-led growth or sales-led growth, however you want to twist it around? Why does it matter for the people on your team? So with that, think about hit time. I hit the limit in 35. We got 5 minutes over, unfortunately. A big thank you. I'm accepting pre-orders for a book that I'm doing. So mainly the role you play there is to motivate me. I'm scared to death about this, and I have 120 days to get it done. So if you can order that, this will put the fire under me to get through all my phobias about book writing, which would be extremely helpful. And yeah, with that, it's Q&A, and I can shut off the screen share, I think, at the moment, and just jump to the Q&A channel. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. There's around 19 questions, John, so probably you want to pick a few that you can answer. And I'll tell you when we have time for the last question.
Yeah, thanks for people sticking around. I know the talking head stuff can be boring, but hopefully that was interesting enough, and I can jump through some of these questions, which I like. Oh, people answered some of them. That's exciting. Okay, John, you may answer during your talk, but getting in early in and moving from feature output to strategic outcome-based prioritization, what's the biggest resistance you've experienced? The challenge to changing that? What I would call, it's the messy middle problem. The messy middle is between 1 and 3 quarters. Strategy can be big and flowy and sit in the PowerPoint deck, and the real world work that happens in the 1 to 3 month zone, everyone knows about. But unpacking what strategy means in the 1 to 3 quarter range in a non-output focused way is the #1 challenge. So the strategy, the McKinsey person has the deck. It's a private equity company that's trying to, whatever, flip your company anyway. And then your team is down there working like crazy. And right there in the middle is that 1 to 3 quarter range, which you have to really shape carefully. So hopefully that helps, Steve. I will answer live and mark done. Great. David James says, one way Agile has been sold is the fact that teams will develop faster. I see this as one of the root causes of companies becoming a feature factory. What tensions have you seen between Agilists and producteers? Oh, goodness. You have to put Agile into context. And again, this is the idea of a functioning feature factory. If you were making an internal product in the early 2000s, the idea that you would march down the hall to talk to anyone and show them something was heretical. I use that broadly because I was building software before then, and we were working in some cool ways, and there's a whole history there. But let's just say that Agile, fits the times that it's in. And so I think that the main thing with the Agile thing is that just are you following the spirit of the Agile manifesto, not this idea of sprints and velocity? I always ask teams, are you shipping faster than you learn, or are you learning faster than you ship? The challenge of the Agile thing is that teams now have become extremely good at shipping faster than they can learn. And so once you flip that and you think, well, what would the Agile Manifesto say? And you're like, well, it kind of talks about this, but really we have to focus on learning as fast as we can ship. Then you can try to reconcile those two worlds. And I think one thing I've noticed is I spent 2 years ago, I was obsessed with Agile and design and Agile and product and trying to defend Agile and then shut the Agile people up. And I realized I was wasting my energy. It really doesn't matter in the end of the day. And I realized I could devote my energy to just show, not tell, and that it was a better approach for me personally. Other people might have some different approaches. Okay. How would you approach drawing leadership's attention to the high WIP problem and reducing WIP in a high growth scaling startup? Here's the way you do it. You go to the store. Oh shit, this is post-COVID, but here's what I would do before, is that you go to the store, you buy the Avery label set, which are your index cards, you print all 3,000 JIRA tickets out, and you lay them on a massive floor, and then you invite the executive to look at the floor, and you say, we've got a problem here. And that's a good technique to do it. So I don't have the magic answer. You need to visualize the work. I would add though, that you notice that visualization I showed you was on the 1-pager level, was on the 1 to 3 month or 1 to 3 quarter rock level. The problem with this WIP discussion is that the teams are so like in the weeds sometimes, and that they can't, no one can visualize what the program level looks like without looking at feature names. And so I would say visualize the work on the program level, Olga, is a really good approach to take with that. Okay. Nadine says, how do you advise is the best way to drive, track, influence your team company to pivot towards outcome-based? You have, back to this show, not tell, you have to divide and conquer. You need to start picking away at the sort of strategy language problem. And that's a big problem. That could take you a couple of quarters. And then you have to pick away and find a team that is able to learn as fast as they ship. Like you need to create the environment where you can start together, focus on an outcome, and then reflect. And the thing you can do next week, no matter which company you are, is start the learning reviews. There's nothing stopping any company from talking about, hey, we shipped this even a quarter ago and here's what we learned. And no one will thank you for that. It's probably not on your calendar already. But if you can find a core group of people to start that practice, you'll find that that will have a positive effect. Okay, Morgan Richards asked, what typically triggers the aha moment when people can observe they're moving towards outcomes and moving away from the output focus? You know, sometimes it's extremely simple. It's everyone thought that bet was a quote unquote no-brainer. And now we're looking at some metrics here. We don't know everything we need to know, but wow, we really missed the mark. So that's one. The next thing is obviously the qualitative feedback you can get from customers, not just about the next thing you're working on, but try to have a focused effort to reach out to people for the qualitative feedback. And I do think that the other aha moment is that when, you know, I gave you that example of the Northern European company, you know, kind of working that quickly. And if you can create that environment where the team is able to like get the feedback loop working. Unfortunately, this seems to happen during hack days. And then the CEO says, why can't every day be like hack day? So we've all been there, but so tread with caution on that one, but showing, not telling is usually a good approach. Adriana says, do you think that IT frameworks and methods, for example, Scrum, focus a lot on process measure instead of focusing more on product measures? Absolutely. And I think that this is, I think it's, hopefully Josh is on the call. I really like what Josh Arnold said about this, is that no one is stopping you from running the things side by side. You know, if you could argue anything you want about story points, or you could argue about velocity is bad or whatever, but the idea you're going to go into your company and say, well, screw all that. That's all that old school way of thinking about it. We need to focus on outcomes. That's not going to win you many friends. There's nothing stopping you running measurement concurrently and seeing if they match up. It would be very interesting to know, for example, whether story points have any correlation to whether you moved a Northstar metric or moved an input into a Northstar metric. That would be an extremely, you know, productive thing to do. It does take a little bit of time and experimentation though. Cool. Bhumika says, how much is too much whip in your opinion? Oh, here'd be my answer. We individually as humans are terrible at our own work in progress. Our bias is so finely tuned to having too much stuff on our plate. So the answer is too much whip is what you think is the right amount of whip. you know that you are at the right point where you could say like, oh my goodness, we're going to be able to handle. I mean, I work on a marketing team now, and the good news is we raised our Series E. We are now a whatever this means unicorn, and all sorts of press and things just suddenly got thrown at us. And we all were extremely enthusiastic. Well, we have Slack, and we were wrong, right? I've been up for 20 hours a day trying to do 3 jobs at this type of stuff. And so I think the right amount is less than you intuitively think it's going to be. So hopefully that's a good thing. And in our personal lives too, as a new parent, I've learned that this is absolutely the case. So hopefully that helps.
Perhaps one more question. Just conscious
Sure.
of time.
Oh, these are great. Wow, geez, we could go all day on these. So yeah, we will try some kind of technique. How many hours of sleep have I had? I was talking with Josh last night at 3 in the morning, I think, or 4. So there was about 2 hours of sleep before we jumped into the next day there. So exactly, Josh is calling me out. See, I'm a walking hypocrite with these things. Okay, I'll do one more. I answered Josh's, okay. Can you point us to any good recommended content or articles on high-level WIP visualizations? You know, I think the Don Ryerson book on product development flow is very heavy on the math and the theory. And if you want to dig through that, you will need to translate that for other people in your company. Whereas even personal Kanban or other books about Kanban are effective to get at the basics of that. It's you know, the work on visualizing value streams by Domenica DeGrandis, I think her name is extremely good. There's a lot of great stuff there about visualizing work. I would remind you to also think about what work means for you and to try to shift it up to the program level bets if you can. And so you need to apply that when you read those books. So, so my email is John, John, period, Cutler, C-U-T-L-E-R. So John, period, Cutler, C-U-T-L-E-R at amplitude.com. You can feel free to email me. And maybe Ramanan, before you shut down the call, maybe you could try to copy and paste these questions out. And then we can, at least I can try at least to look through some of them and reach back to your community if that helps with some of them.
Yeah, perfect.
There's so many good
thanks.
ones. That's the challenge I have there. So yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, this is wonderful. I'm grateful to be able to chat with everyone.
Cool. Thank you, John. That's really, really good. Good wisdoms on your talk and the answers. We'll see if we can copy those questions and post it back on the Meetup channel, and we'll also post the email address so that people can contact you directly for any other questions.
Absolutely.
I just want to say, like, you know, thanks for giving us your time. I know when I reached out to you that you didn't hesitate for a moment. So that's really, really helpful for us to hear from you directly.
Thanks, John.
Yep, my pleasure. And I will come to New Zealand. This is going to happen, and I'm going to come there, and he's going to be 3 or 4 years old by that point. But like, this is going to happen. This has to happen. Yeah, this was going to happen, and it couldn't.
What is the title of your book? Is that coming soon so that we can look up for it?
I don't know. I was thinking about calling it The Beautiful Mess, but the trick with what I've learned is I love Twitter and stuff, and I've drawn a ton of stuff. I'm going to try to make a visual book about these ideas. I sort of embrace the idea that maybe my head's not in the space of writing a 300-page real book. So I'm just going to do what I like doing and get the book out.
Perfect. Okay. I just want to quickly move on to a couple of things before we close this call. And big thank you to everyone who helped organize this event. I just want to call out a few names here. Talks, Anthony, David here, and Kaz and Andre from Christchurch as well. So thank you so much. Now, let me invite Talks to give a little bit of update on the recent Mind the Product offering that they have been promoting.
Thanks, Ramon. It's a pretty unique effort, opportunity. I'm looking at the participant numbers, and it's dropping drastically as I speak. And I was thinking this is going to be an opportunity to talk to 200 people, but it's already 188. The next person who leaves, I'll take it as a personal affront. Hey, there's a few things, just a couple of things from Mind the Product that I thought would be worth mentioning to the 183 people who are still willing to listen to to this a little bit longer. They've introduced a membership concept. So at the moment, if you've been going to their blog, if you've been attending product tanks, if you've been doing, reading, looking at some of their videos, listening to their podcasts, that's all free and is going to continue to be free, but they're introducing a couple of membership layers that give you access to even more content and some sort of expert opinion, a new newsletter, even some discounts on some conferences when they can start bringing those up together, bringing them back again. I think this is really important because they may not push this, but certainly Mind the Product have been super hard hit by COVID. They made a lot of their revenue comes from running those conferences around the world and doing some of their in-person training. So I think they've moved this up the list a little bit in terms of what they can offer to try and help them keep going through this tough time. So if anything, it's kind of like a nice way to show your appreciation. The next slide is even more, is probably better news in that you don't have to, it's not about paying more for stuff that you might not want yet, but it is about the opportunity to do some of their training, which is now being made remote. So up until recently, they mainly did in-person workshops. And so now they're introducing remote training, which means that we down here in New Zealand can go and take part in some of these training courses that they're making remote. So that's really good news. And so if you're up for some pretty good content that I've been looking through in the last few days, then check that out. I think Anthony's going to talk a little bit about some announcements quickly for the remaining 157 people on the call. And I don't have any Wellington announcements. We haven't got our next meetup planned. I think Ants might be trumping that with his next announcement, but I'll let Ants take over from now. But thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks Andrew, and thanks again Ramanan for organising this. This was a massive effort on his part in particular, so well done Ramanan. Yeah, some really cool stuff that's happening up in Auckland. So we have Rich Mironov, who was on the call today. So I don't know, Rich, if you're still around, but thanks so much for coming along today. Rich is going to be speaking on Tuesday, the 9th of June at 8 AM New Zealand time. So that's around about 2 weeks from now. So that's going to be really awesome. It's going to be a fantastic talk. The event invite for that will go live shortly, and we'll have the additional capacity that we put on for today's event available for that as well. So definitely we can get lots of people in if you are keen to attend that. The next really exciting thing that we have coming up is those of you who are part of the Auckland community will remember we had an unconference late last year, which was really successful. And the number one bit of feedback that we got was when you're doing the next one. Now, obviously, we aren't quite at the point of being able to do an in-person unconference, but we're going to give a virtual unconference a go. It's going to be really fun. We've got a lot of interesting stuff lined up for that. We are looking at the morning of Saturday, the 20th of June. So it will be a morning event again. We did talk about doing a day, but we think virtual for a day is going to be just a bit much for everyone. So we're going to give it a go. It's going to be an experiment for us. It's going to be really fun. We're going to have early bird tickets available for that, and they will also be released shortly. So keep an eye on your emails for that. And then just to reiterate what Ramanan said earlier on is that this is the beginning of World Product Day. We are the very first product tank in the world, or group of product tanks in the world, to have a World Product Day event. There's a lot of amazing stuff coming up. There's some really cool events happening in Australia this afternoon. There's some great stuff happening out of Asia in the evening, and there's some really cool stuff happening in the UK, which is tomorrow morning New Zealand time. So go and check out worldproductday.com. That's worldproductday.com. It's got the full schedule there. It's got a link to all of the events. Everything is online, so anyone can join in and listen in. There's some really, really cool speakers who we would just not normally have a chance to listen to down here in New Zealand, so do dial in to join that. So thank you again so much, everyone, for joining. Ramanan, was there anything you wanted to say in closing?
I just want to kind of quickly say that that's a wrap up for World Product Day from New Zealand. And in terms of recording and slides, we'll post on the meetup pages. And we'll also try our best to answer those questions outside as well as John's email. So thank you, John. Your spacecraft is waiting. You can now fly back to San Francisco.